Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's UDC Library webinar, Personal Archiving for Parents. We're going to focus on the overall issues of personal archiving, but provide a special emphasis on issues important to parents or those who are parenting. This session is being recorded, and we'll have time for questions at the end, both recorded and unrecorded. The recording will be posted to YouTube, and the link will be shared to everyone who registered today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to either save them for the end or put them in the chat as they come to you. I do have that window open and I can keep an eye on it as we go. So our goals for today is we're going to take a look at what personal archiving is, why and what you might want to archive, creating your archive. We're going to discuss best practices. Then we're going to get into the special issues of how to handle all that kid stuff and what to do with your archive once you have it. And then at the end, I'm going to walk you through my personal archive. I'm Megan Kowalski. I am the Outreach and Reference Librarian for the UDC Library, and I am the mother of a soon-to-be 5-year-old. So I understand everything that comes with kids when it comes to their stuff and their artwork, which is partly what spurred today's webinar. So what is personal archiving? Personal archiving is the selecting, maintaining, and preserving of a record of objects of your personal experience and life to keep them for the future, either for yourself or to pass along to others. So why do you want to have a personal archive? Well, first things first, it is the story of you. It is the story of your family and your friends and your community. And also, if you don't save it, it might not get saved. And you could do awesome things one day that might end up in a museum. So the saving of the story of your life has to start somewhere, and that begins with a personal archive. So what goes into a personal archive? Well, you get to decide. And all of this, personal archive material is print or digital. And some of those things can include photos, everything you take with your phone, plus all those Polaroids you might have if you're older, or anything you might remember from when you were growing up through your family history. This includes documents, both personal history or those life maintenance stuff. A mortgage can be a part of your personal archive. The deed to anything you own can be your personal archive. Those certificates of authenticity from any objects you might collect can count. It can also include things like emails, your online activity, like your tweets or your Instagram pictures, or anything else your life online encompasses. It can also include diaries and journals, or objects like trophies, ribbons, greeting cards, mementos, anything of that nature. It can also include oral history, either ones you complete or ones someone does for you or of your family. And it can include artwork, your stuff that you've made, your family's items, the stuff the kid creates, or, artwork that you've inherited or that you collect because you decide you were interested in it. And this is just a small list of what can go into your personal archive. Personal archive essentially encompasses anything you want to save, keep, and share for the future, no matter what form it takes, print or digital. And so what I'm going to provide today is an overview of the personal archiving process. And this can be overwhelming at first. So just remember, all it takes is just getting started and then taking your time and slowly working through it. So what I'm going to talk about right now is the steps it takes to create your personal archive. So first things first, step one, where is your stuff? Is it in physical locations like boxes, bags, files, folders, closets, wherever you might keep stuff you are interested in saving? Is it in digital locations? Is it on computers? This day and age, we all tend to have old computers. Is it on hard drives? Is it on cameras, phones, thumb drives, cloud services, social media, games? Where does everything live? So you need to know where your stuff is. Next, you want to gather all of that material, both physical and digital. This takes time, so batch it up. Don't be afraid to work on this little by little. Then you need to select, review every single item you are considering saving. We can't save everything. Not even librarians and archivists say everything. That's why it's called curation. You save what matters and is important to you and the telling of your story or the history of your family. And then once you've selected these items, you have options of what to do with them. You can go ahead and trash things. I don't know how many of you remember duplicates for photos used to be a thing when you got them printed. Do you need to keep two, or can you trash the second one? You can digitize an item and then trash it, where you're saving the memory but not the physical object. You can digitize and keep the item, so you're also creating a digital record of something, or you can just keep it. If it's a physical item, but you don't need to digitize it, you can just keep the physical item. Next, you want to sort and organize. And this is highly personal, how you decide to sort and organize your archive. But the most personal, or the most obvious way to do this is by date. That is the most common, where you put the oldest thing deeper in your archive, or by type. So, you can sort paperwork by type and then by date. So you have, all your house paperwork in one area, all of your medical paperwork in one area, all of your diaries in one area, and then sort things by date. And you can also create categories of material. And this is particularly important when we're talking digital archives, and I'll talk more about that later. Next, you need to store and maintain. Where are you keeping your stuff, both physical and digital? And when you're considering where to store and maintain your archive, you want to consider a safe space and think of the accessibility. If it's a physical object, do you want to keep it in your house, in a closet you go into every day? Do you want to keep it in an attic you only check on once a year? Or can you keep it off site in, a third-party storage facility? Where you keep your stuff depends on how important it is to you and where you need it. Mostly, you just need to make sure that it is safe and secure so that you can maintain access to it with the ease that you need, but also that you can keep it private if you want. Then you need to consider reviewing your archive. And I recommend doing this annually at a minimum. And the reason for this is archives grow. You don't necessarily need to keep everything over time. But also, when you're doing this review, you want to physically check material for damage. The earlier you catch problems, the easier they are to fix. So say you're keeping something in an attic, you want to make sure that, things aren't drying out because it's so hot. Or if you're keeping things in a basement, you want to make sure that mold's not growing on them if you happen to have moisture issues. And this also gives you a chance to, what we call in library world, deaccession physical and digital materials. Just because you decided to keep it the first time does not mean you need to keep it forever. And also, this is just a fun way to give yourself an annual walk through your life. It's always fun to go back and look at your old diaries or look at your old photos. And this gives you a chance to sort of relive your memories, either on your own or whoever you happen to be reviewing the archive with. And so those are the basic steps of how to create an archive. And I know it's a broad overview, but this is an introductory course, and I'm going to share some resources at the end where you can learn more about this. And now we're going to get into some best practices. And personal archiving can be as simple or as involved as you want it to be. It can also be done on the cheap side or at great expense. How you do this depends on your physical means and your motives and what you are trying to keep. But I just wanted to share some best practices to keep in mind. And first, we're going to start looking at the physical aspects of your archive, and then we're going to go into the digital aspects. So first things first, when we are keeping materials, how do you keep them? Well, when it comes to a personal archive, generally I recommend plastic. Plastic tubs, plastic bins. They tend to provide more protection from water and damp, which is usually the biggest threat to your personal archive. Now, if you happen to work in a library or an archive, you might be shuddering and thinking, oh, plastic. But for a personal archive, this is best simply because it provides the most, protection from what you generally encounter when saving stuff. That said, there are plenty of archival level resources out there that you can use, and you can also use those as well. In my personal archive, I have a mix. You also want to consider archival boxes and packing material. So when you're storing physical items, what you want to look for is non-acidic material, and these will be labeled as such. And you can find these things from either library vendors, office supply stores, or places like the Container Store, they do all sell non-acidic material. And the reason you want this is if the material you are storing your archive in is acidic, it will migrate into the material you want to keep and degrade it over time. Either losing the color, losing the quality. So this is why you want non-acidic. For essential items, you also want to consider a firebox. And this can keep really important physical items safe in case there is a fire in your location. And generally, this is just a best practice in life to have a firebox for all those important papers and documents, but also it provides additional security. So if there's, say, jewelry items you want to keep, you may also want to consider keeping those in a firebox as well. You also want to pay attention to environmental tracking. So you can pick up humidity and temperature trackers very cheaply from Amazon. I'm going to show one later in the slides. And this way you can be aware of your items are and what the temperature and humidity are in those spaces. The more humid something is, the more likely it is that you could have mold growth. So these trackers can help you pay attention. And it's a good idea to keep these trackers at the location of your personal archive. That way, you can see what we call a microclimate in your area. Because guess what? A closet's going to be different from the bedroom it's next to. Even though they're right next to one another, simply because a closet often has a closed door, it's going to create a microclimate. So it's a good idea to have a tracker in that space. And what's great is these days, these can be acquired very cheaply, and most of them are Wi-Fi enabled with apps. So you don't even need to open the door to check on the temperature and humidity. Next, you want to think, where are you going to keep those items? You want to consider, do you need easy access to it? Right away you can get to it when you need it, or is it okay to have things stored off-site? And what you decide here depends on you. Same thing with security. How secure does something need to be? Is it a family heirloom that's worth a lot of money? You might want to put it in a firebox, or you may want to consider having it at a bank in a safe deposit box. Consider the overall security of the item and how much it means to you. Just because something is cheap doesn't mean it's not of great importance. So that value is both a mix of what it means to you personally and emotionally and the monetary value. You also want to consider the risk of damage. Flooding, mold, pests, keep these things in mind. A lot of times we think to store things in basements or in attics, but the problems with basements or in attics is basements, we tend to get flooding issues, and attics, we get leaks or heat. So just keep those things in mind. Oftentimes the best place to keep something on site is in a climate controlled closet. So a bedroom closet is a great place to keep these things, or a hallway closet is a great place to keep these things. And then you want to do your best to keep the area dark. Dark is best, low light is fine, and this is because sun has the ability to bleach materials and damage materials over time. So dark is best or low light. And again, we want to think about preservation. And on the screen right now, you'll see one of these humidity monitors. This is provided by Govee. I got this on Amazon. We have 3 in our home. It helps us maintain the HVAC quality in our space, but it also lets us know what the temperatures and pressures or the temperatures and humidities are like. And so when you're preserving things in your personal archive, you want to keep them in a space with a temperature that's between 60 and 70 degrees. Now, in professional archives, this would be considered warm, but in a personal archive, we need to balance the needs of humans who are going to be in that space all the time and the material. So this is why 60 to 70 degrees is ideal. With humidity, again, between 40 and 60%. Again, in archives, this might seem a little high, but we need to, think of the comfort of humans with the comfort and preservation of the stuff. And then you want to keep things dry. And this is where you can use something called desiccant, usually in the form of silica gel packets. And what these do is they draw the moisture out of the air and away from the objects. And the best thing about it is most of these, anytime you buy a pair of shoes, there's usually some in the shoes, and you can go ahead and save those and reuse these in your archives. Or you can buy professional quality stuff, usually from an office supply store or a commercial vendor like a library vendor. And then some other things you might want to keep in mind is sorting and labeling things, picture separators. If you put your photos in a picture box, maybe you want labels that have the year. You might also want to consider specialty storage, document sleeves or folders, oversized containers, round poster tubes. Again, these are all easily acquired in an office supply store or Amazon, something like that. You also want to wrap your fragile objects simply to protect them over time. And again, this should be in not acidic tissue papers. And these are, again, easily acquired online or at office supply stores. Now we're going to move into the digital practice or digital best practices. And there's some equipment things you might want to consider when you're creating your personal archive. Generally, you're going to want a flatbed scanner, or these days, a phone is a great backup for this. You might also want a hard drive or a thumb drive that you can back up everything and save it in a Firebox. You also want to consider a digital online archive. So either your desktop folders or an online file sharing platform like Dropbox, Google, or Microsoft OneDrive. And you also want to make sure you have a backup service, whether you back things up manually, but automatic is best. You want anything in your digital archive to be backed up. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but this is the idea in libraries of loxies. Lots of copies keeps stuff safe. You simply want your online stuff to be backed up in more than one location, because what happens if you drop your laptop and all of your personal material was only on that one thing? You might not be able to recover it. So this is why you always want at least one. I highly recommend 2 or 3 backups of your digital materials. And so talking about that, again, at least 3 locations. One physical, if possible, like literally a hard drive you back up and keep in your Firebox, and 2 digital. And you want to be careful to make sure these are not all Amazon Web Services. These day and ages, there are a lot of vendors out there that they say, hey, we'll back up your stuff automatically, which is fantastic. But if you use more than one and they all happen to store everything on an Amazon Web Service, your stuff is at risk. And this has happened to professional libraries and archives before. Stuff has been backed up by Amazon, but they've only had it on Amazon clouds. And if Amazon loses that server, you could lose your stuff. And this has happened to professional organizations. So you always want to read the footnotes and things, read the contracts, and make sure you're backing stuff up to, yes, Amazon's fine. Maybe have a backup that is not Amazon. You also want to check your file access annually. This is just where you can go in and spot check files to make sure that they open and things like that. All you need to do is open random files and see if they work. This is also a chance to make sure that you still have the software to open things. This day and age, a lot of digital materials comes from what we call proprietary software. So you have to ensure that you still pay to use that software to keep things safe and open. So make sure that when you're saving stuff, it's in a file format that you can still access. And so that means things like JPEGs, because that's not a proprietary file service. And then also you want to update your physical backups every 3 to 5 years. And this is because hardware degrades over time. So if you do have that physical hard drive in a Firebox, you're going to want to replace that every 3 to 5 years, simply because over time it is just going to stop working. That's just a fact. And so when it comes to actually scanning material, scanning the photos and documents you want to save, there are some standards. And DPI, which stands for dots per inch, speaks to the quality of the scan, like how much data is in that file. 300 DPI is generally considered preservation standard for a personal archive, but you can go much higher than this. But it depends on what you want to do with those files. If you just want to save the image so you can look at it, 300 DPI is enough. If you're thinking of saving a photograph and blowing it up as a big print, you're gonna want to have a higher DPI. You also want to consider your file format. TIFF and RAW are considered, preservation quality level file formats. There's more data in them versus a JPEG image, which is still plenty fine, but that's going to have less data in it, meaning it might degrade faster in your files over time. And again, you want to be aware of proprietary file formats. PDF is actually a proprietary file format provided by Adobe. Now, this day and age, it's considered pretty standard, but it is proprietary versus a .doc or a Word document, not necessarily Microsoft Word, just a Word document. That's not proprietary, so it saves different. And so just make sure that when you're saving things, it's in a way that you can access and save over time. Now, you also want to consider reformatting, and this is when files may no longer be accessible. Say you stop paying for a proprietary program. You're going to want to convert those files into something you can still access. This can also mean when there's a new file format, you need to share materials. This day and age, when you take photos with an iPhone, they are saved as HEIC. That is Apple's proprietary, photo format. You can convert those to a JPEG or a TIFF. So these are some things to keep in mind. And it's also, proprietary files may no longer be affordable or accessible. So make sure you're saving something in a way that you can keep over time because obsolescence does happen. Companies stop working and then they stop, supporting those systems. Next, you might also want to consider the metadata, and this is data about the data. Where did this thing originate? When was the file taken or created? What's the size of the file? Where's the geographic location? This day and age, a lot of cameras, when you take photos, save all of this immediately. It'll tell you you took it, in Washington, D.C. on July 12th at noon in this is what's happening. Some of that's automatically there. Some older files, you might need to key that in. But what's great about digital files is you can open the file and add more metadata if you wish. And another thing to keep in mind with digital best practices is file naming. This day and age, we're so used to being able to just search things that I've often discovered that a lot of our users at the library don't understand file naming conventions because they're so used to just being able to search to find what it is. But when it comes to a personal archive, you're going to want to have naming conventions when you save things simply because it means it's easier to find. And then whoever comes after you is going to have a better idea of what's happening with the digital material. So when it comes to file naming, shorter is better. It's just easier to work with it. And digital files should almost always include the date, whether at the folder level or the actual file name. You also don't want to include special characters. So these are things like ampersands and asterisks, simply because they don't work. You also want to use underscores, and that's, like a line under the score or a camel case and not spaces, simply because when you put a space in a file name, they are more likely to be corrupted. And consistency is key. So no matter what you decide, be consistent with your file naming and stick with it. If you decide to change your file naming conventions, go back and make everything consistent. You also want to be descriptive. You have to know what something is at first glance, whether at the folder level or at the actual itemized file name. And if you have multiple files, say you're scanning a diary and you want to have all the images in one folder, you're going to need numbers on that. And generally, we use what's called a leading zero, so 001 or 0003. However many, zeros you use is going to depend on, how many things you have to save. Generally, having a number that's 2 zeros plus a number is enough, 3 total digits. But if you're saving a book or something that's 1,000 pages long, you're going to need 4. So how many you decide there depends on your need and what you're saving. You're also going to want to create a file naming index, and this essentially explains how files are named and where they are located. And you can even add additional details like, it's in this folder, here's the backup schedule, it was last backed up on this day. And I have this, well, I'm slowly developing mine, and this is just an Excel spreadsheet that I have. And this is something also you're going to want to back up and maybe print out on occasion so you have that physical backup. And this file naming index can also provide context. So for certain things I'm doing, I have the file name, the date, the location, and then I'm going to add the people in the photo and then the context of the story, extended notes, my memories of what was happening at the moment. And so this way, when you pass your personal archive along, whoever gets it after you knows what's happening. And for me, that's going to be my daughter one day. So I'd love to be able to explain to her what was happening in my photos from when I was in college. And then you want to consider documentation. Again, don't throw everything in one folder, have a system of folders. So yes, you can have an overall folder that says personal archive, but maybe within that, you're going to want something that says photos and then have each photo folder be by date. Again, you're going to want to have an index. You can have one master index, but you could also consider doing one per folder listing what is in there. You might also want to consider drafting a narrative document to provide context in the story of each folder. This can be as short or as long as you want, or just provide dates, but essentially, you want to provide the story of what is happening in that section of your. And then what do you want someone who has no knowledge of your archive to know? If you were handing this to a total stranger or, to say your grandchild one day, what do you want them to know? And that's what this narrative document can be used for. And then we have some extra bonus tidbits. You can be extra with your, personal archive. You can create your own online archive. You can host it on a website, a blog, create a newsletter. You can share it with your family and friends or other groups who might be related in your interests. If your family has lived in one area for a long time, the Historical Society might be interested in what you have to share. You might also want to consider joining an organization or a website like ancestry.com and uploading the information you have here. This is your stuff to share. You get to decide how dispersed you want it to be. And there are just a few additional final details I want to talk about before we get focused on the kids' stuff. So, first things first, handwriting. The picture here is a card my father sent me. Unless you are related to my father or happen to be his secretary, you probably cannot read this text. It's chicken scratch to most people. Many things you may want to keep could be handwritten, and that includes diaries, letters, notes, information on the back of photographs, anything of that sort. So, first things to consider, can you read it? If not, try to find someone who can. Then think about the future. Instruction in cursive is declining. In fact, most schools do not teach it anymore. Professional archivists are having to teach grad students how to read this quote unquote old school handwriting simply because it is not taught anymore. So consider typing up handwritten items and notes and keep a master file of those transcriptions along with the original item together. So if I was going to keep this note from my father, I would want to transcribe it, digitize both of them, and keep them in the same folder simply so that I have access to this material. For physical items I want to keep, I might also want to consider doing a printout of that transcription and again, keeping those in the same file folder, simply so people in the future could read whatever the heck it was my dad was trying to tell us here. I also want to make a special call out to cookbooks and recipes. There's a lot of family and cultural history tied up in the food we create, share, and eat. And I'm thinking a lot about those, grandma's secret cake or grandpa's grilled chicken. You may have physical recipes and cookbooks to see. In that case, go ahead and digitize and preserve those items. And again, make sure any notes that might be in the margin or post-it noted on are transcribed along with it, simply so that you have the full context. If you don't have a physical item, consider going to the chef whose recipe you want to save and ask for it. It can be precious to save their recipe, but it's also precious to have it in either, them telling you the story of it orally or handwritten. And it's always helpful to add context to the recipe. How did you come by it? When was it eaten? What are the stories people say about this? In my family, there's this story of my great great aunt's crab imperial and how she used to make it. And everyone said the secret ingredient was a cigarette ash that came off as she was making it. And so that's a story that I want to save for my family. So when I save that recipe, I'm going to make a note about, the cigarette ash that was a secret ingredient. And yes, it was a family joke, but it's a family joke worth saying. Gives context and history to that specific recipe. And everyone has a story to share. We all hang out, we share stories at meals, and we just talk. And those things are worth saving. Consider interviewing people to capture certain stories. This can be formal with a preset set of questions. In fact, there are plenty of organizations out there that provide these questions, or it can be informal where you just chat. In audio, you have the benefit of being able to capture verbal emotions along with the actual sound of someone's voice. When you record, and a recording can be done on professional equipment or just with your phone, how you do it is up to you. But you can also consider doing a video recording as well, so you can also get the person's physical, expressions on form. And one example I want to give is I recorded the lullaby I sing to my daughter every night. That was mostly for me, but maybe one day she will appreciate it. simply so that she has that memory over time whenever she presses play on that. And if people send you voice memos or, voicemails, you can also consider downloading and saving those as well. There are often stories of people saying they were saved the last message someone sent to them, before they died. And that's a precious memory, and we want to save that. And then you want to preserve and protect everything. If you're going to spend a lot of money, do it here. Reserve this for the most precious items. These are things like heirlooms, irreplaceable items, both in terms of the item and in terms of the memory. Again, get a firebox for your important papers and your print pictures, but also to keep those hard drive backups in that firebox. For unique items like, say, wedding dresses, there are commercial preservation services that will treat and develop, custom protection boxes, and costs for this are all over the place. It depends on what you want to preserve and how much customization you need. For artwork and other frameable items, go to a specialist to get this done, because that's important to both preserve the item and create a great display piece. And I want to say, get the good glass. And by this, I mean museum quality glass. This blocks UV sunlight, which can degrade items over time, and sunlight does a lot of damage to items. So if you are hanging artwork or anything you've had framed, make sure you get that UV protection glass. And this will add quite a bit of cost to the framing, but it is worth it in the end if this is an item that is important. And by far, we all keep far too much information on our phones. So get stuff off your phones between photos, notes, apps, whatever. There's a lot of great stuff on these things that we carry around and break far more often than we should. So get it off your phone. You can use an auto backup program like iCloud or Amazon Photos to auto backup everything on your phone, or you can manually download things to a computer. Most phones you can hook up to a laptop with a USB cord. Don't assume things will be safe. Files corrupt all the time. You could lose your phone. You could drop it in a lake. If you're a parent, the risk of dropping a phone in a toilet is pretty high. So at least once a month, get things off your phone. Just trust me on it. If you take nothing else away from this, back up your phone once a month. That is the main thing to remember. And so now that we've covered the essentials of personal archiving, I'm going to now focus down on the kid stuff. And so first, let's all take a deep moment to breathe. It can be incredibly hard to go through all the precious things related to the kids in our lives. We have memories of those moments, of those items, and on top of that, we might be worried about the future. Will our kids hate us if we throw away this rock they painted? Or would they hope that we had saved this thing, when they were a teenager? Did they want that baby blanket? So these are all the things we're going to be stressing over. So let's just take a moment to breathe. And I want to start with a few things to remember. Consider this permission if you need to before going forward on, doing the personal archival stuff with the things, related to the kids in your life. You don't have to love it all. In fact, you don't even have to like it. It is okay not to keep everything. It is okay. In fact, it is necessary to throw things away. If we keep it all, then nothing is special. Your kids will be fine, and honestly, mostly they won't even care, and you will be fine. So just breathe through this process and try to remember you're saving the stuff that matters, the memories. And so only you can decide what is worth keeping, not just for your own desires, but what you want to hand down to your kids. Some of the physical items that are worth keeping are things like clothing and shoes. We kept our kiddos coming home outfit from the hospital. In fact, that's what's on the photo. I went through my personal archive to get some of these pictures, and oh, I forgot she was so little. Baby blankets are another big thing, particularly if a family member or loved one made them for you. Other things you might want to consider keeping are baby memory books, toys, stuffed animals, books you actually read together when they were little, and all of that artwork that they make, and really anything that matters to you. For example, I was forever grateful when the hairdresser who did our kiddo's very first haircut snipped off one of her curls and put it into an envelope for us. You can tell she had been working with kids for a while because I got that little envelope and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but right now it's precious to me and I'm not getting rid of it. But there are also digital things you might want to consider saving. Obviously, pictures and videos, usually on our phones, are the obvious ones. But if you used a baby tracking app, you might want to download and preserve that information. We used a baby tracking app, and I actually went and saved the data from her first month, mainly to remind myself of why I was so sleep deprived, because I could see all of those feedings and overnight wake ups. Our daycare uses an app, and you can download pictures and videos from it. You can also screenshot things if you want to retain the notes that came with those apps. One thing I am doing with my daughter in lieu of a physical baby book is I'm sending her emails. I set up an email address and started sending messages to it when I was pregnant. I send stuff at least monthly, but I also just shoot quick messages, when she does something funny or says something funny and I want to save it. And when our kid turns 18, I'm actually planning on handing her the password to that so she can read everything. And so I'm also not only sending those as emails to her, but I'm saving everything I send as a PDF as a backup to myself. And so I have the memory in case Gmail decides, we're not having Gmail anymore. And so, how do you decide what to keep? Specifically when it comes to kid art. So, I covered this at the top of the webinar, but when it comes to kids' work, there are a few more things to consider. The most important thing to remember is that you are saving the memory and not necessarily the material. So, when it comes to things, particularly like kid art, you might want to consider, is this the first? Is this the first time they've done something? Is it the first time they painted, the first time they used crayons, a pencil, the first time they wrote a word? Is it the first? Is it a seminal work? And, that just means, is this the most important work that they have done in this field that they've been working on? If you've hung around kids, you notice their artwork changes over time and they go through phases. So keep that in mind. Is it the best? Is it just something you really like? Is it the best? That's another reason to keep something. Another reason is it tied to a memory? So this image on the screen is a painting our kiddo did. I like it, but mostly I'm saving it from the memory behind it. She was painting alone in our kitchen when she called out, "Mom, covered the whole thing." And I ran to the kitchen because I had visions of her covering her walls or the counter. I had no idea. Instead, I saw her beaming this big bright smile when she walked in and pointed that she had covered the entire sheet of paper with watercolor. And so, from my fear to her happiness, this memory is going to live with me, and I wanted to preserve that. And you might also want to consider, do you just really want to keep it? Do you like it? Do you just want to keep it? That's a reason to keep it. And then also get your kiddo in it, particularly when they get older. Do they really want to keep it? Sometimes kids get tied to specific things, and it's okay to keep it. They might change their mind later, but you can always keep it for a little bit. As your kids get older, involve them in the process, not just in, say, the review of the material, but also that annual check of everything that's there. That gives you a chance not only to share the memories and pass along the stories, but you can create new memories in the process of going through that. And so when it comes to deciding what artwork to keep, you have to go through the collect and assess process. And I'm going to share what that looks like in our house. First, we designated a spot to collect all of our kiddos' art. And so our drop spot is on the top of a bookcase in our living room. It's centrally located and up high, creating an out of sight, out of mind for the kiddo, because if she sees it, she's going to want to keep it. But if we put it up there, even for a day or two, she's kind of going to forget about it, which gives us a chance to go through it. And so after school every day, we empty her backpack and we put her art up there. If our kiddo has made art at home, after she goes to bed, we add it to the pile. We do let our kiddo decide what pieces she wants to display around the house, but 99% of what she does ends up in this pile. And then this on the table is approximately 3 weeks worth of our kiddos' art. And we've even trashed the obvious stuff as we go. So once a month or so, we take this pile and in it, there's art created at school, at art camps, at homes, but it's mostly paper. There's some beadwork, some clay. I think there was a rock in there. There might have been a stick. Who knows? Kiddos turn everything into art. And the photo does not do the pile justice because this was about 8 inches high and the top piece of art was compressing the pile down. And so this was after the initial cull, as I call it, to pull the obvious trash. Some things just aren't worth saving. A lot of these things is just a piece of paper she scribbled on and we're like, okay, fine. Everything else looks like this. And so this is the pile we have decided we are going to scan or photograph to save the memory. Again, we're not necessarily keeping the physical item, but just save the memory we're scanning or photographing it. And finally, these are the keepers. We scanned or photographed them as a backup, and then we kept the physical item. The two items on the left, are my Mother's Day card and a personal self-portrait she did at school. We're keeping those in our archive. The two items on the right are drawings we saved to give to the grandparents. Life hack, grandparents, family, and friends are delighted to get kid-created art. My best friend even has some of my kids' art on her fridge. Do not be afraid to share it with them. Anytime I send something, I say, do with this what you will, whether that means they keep it or they think, yay, it's nice and then throw it away. It's up to them. But more often than not, every time I go to my best friend's house, she's got my kids' art hanging on her fridge because she's delighted by it. And so we've allocated ourselves to just two bins for our kids' art, one for regular small sized items and one for oversized art. And this was on purpose. Having this constraint forces us to truly consider what is worth keeping. You cannot keep everything, so having a physical constraint keeps you from trying to save it all. And so as you see here, these bins can fill up quickly. This is why it is important to review everything at least once a year. When we do our annual review of this bin, we first get to enjoy the memories of the items all over again, but next we will reconsider what items are truly worth keeping. Because remember, just because we kept something once doesn't mean we need to keep it forever. For example, we have all of our kiddos' journals from daycare in here right now. Long term, we might keep one of the three. And I know we're going to get another one before she leaves daycare in the next month or so. And remember, we've digitized these items already. So we still have the memory digitally. So we don't necessarily need to keep the physical item. And so in addition to archiving, there are other things you can do with all of that kit art. So you can consider sending some of your scans to vendors to have them make an art album. There are plenty of places out there like Shutterfly that can create art albums with things you scanned. There are also some companies where you send them the art. They do all the scanning and, either keep the art or send you the scans and a physical item and a physical album of the scans. You can also mix in, the artwork scans into, photographs and make yourself an annual yearbook of your family. You can do physical displays. This can be, just kid art or mixed in with other things. Shadow boxes are great for 3D items. I've even taken some of my kiddos' pieces to work and used them to decorate my office. And so on this slide, the top image in the frame is designed to make it easy to swap art in and out. It literally hooks, front comes down, I can swap in the art and close it back up without even taking it off the wall. There are even thicker frames specifically designed to display kids' art. You open the frame and just add in more art as they go, and these can hold a lot of pieces at one time. You can also use the scans and photographs and share them through digital photo albums and online albums or photo frames. And I oftentimes take the digital scans of my kids' work and use them as backgrounds on my phone and my desktop computer. So what you can do with this is, what you prefer. You can have kid art everywhere. We let our kid decide to have some up in her room. That decide what works for you. There are actually no rules here. And so in our home, we've designated one wall as the kiddo's art display. She can put whatever she wants here. Sometimes there are a lot of changes. Sometimes it sits for months before she swaps things out. And so this is the lower half of a wall in our kitchen where she has full reach and control here. And painter's tape is your friend. It's cheap, it's easy, it does not hurt the wall. May tear some paper, which is why, as you see here, it can be useful to get an occasional picture of what these galleries look like to, again, capture the moment and save the memory. You can also consider things like magnetic whiteboards or cork boards to the same effect, depending on what you prefer in your home. We've also mixed in some of our kiddos' work in a more adult display. This is a gallery wall in our daughter's room. It has art I made, some art my uncle made, a few professional items, and a few of our, just a few other pieces. We also framed plate our kiddo decorated when she was in the infant room at daycare. And we hung a little canvas she made a little bit further along in school. And this wall will expand as our kiddo grows. And as she gets older, she'll have more and more say about what goes on here. And if she decides she wants to take something down, we'll either add that item into the personal archive in our closet, or we'll just get rid of it. De-accessioning is okay. It's not a dirty word. And so now that I'm going to give you a deeper look at my personal family archive, this is a work in progress, but I want to show you what it looks like in the process and then talk about what is left to do because it's always ongoing. And so this is our bedroom closet. The bulk of this resides on the top shelf, and we have a firebox in a front hall closet. Other items we enjoy so much, we've left them out to display in our home. But things were not always this organized and contained. This only came after a lot of work during the pandemic. When we were all stuck at home, this is what I did. It was a great pandemic activity. So for my process, this was 2 years of concentrated work at the start and was the perfect excuse to stay home and work on it. So just know you can do this as you see fit, make time as you need to. So what I did first was I collected everything: yearbooks, photos, clothing, old diaries, everything we had for mostly myself, but my husband as well. I collected everything. And then I went through and weeded. I used to have tons of photos and I realized I don't need to keep the negatives. I don't need to keep the duplicates because that's not a thing anymore. I weeded everything that was not worth keeping. Then I scanned items that would fit on my flatbed scanner and I photographed those that did not. I organized things by type. I stored the keepers, and now I do monthly upkeep and an annual review just to try to stay on top of things. I have a little bit of backlog left in terms of scanning and digitization, but this is what I've worked on so far. And so as you can see here, this is a photo box I have organized by year, and I have those little tabs so I can see it. Along the side, I have some CD-ROMs of some projects I did in college. I have no way of reading those now. So I got to figure out if I'm going to go out and get those digitized professionally, or if I'm going to just say, I'm done with this, I don't need to keep them. So as you can see, I'm still working on this. And in the back, I'm now saving our annual Christmas cards because those are the only things I tend to be printing out these days. These are a couple of other tubs. On the left, I have my big tub with I'm a bullet journaler, which operates both as a to-do list and a diary. So those are my bullet journals. I have a shadow box my husband made me for our first dating anniversary. We have all of our diplomas in there from middle school, high school, and college. That box on the left is a box my uncle made us for our greeting cards on our wedding day. So now within that, as you'll see on the far right, are some memories both from my husband, but also things from our wedding, like the topper we had in our cupcake and the hand fasting ribbons we used. I've also saved a couple of the print versions of things I've had published and a cross stitch my mom made me when I was a baby. These are one of those silica desiccant gel packets I mentioned way at the top of the webinar. Anytime a package arrives, usually shoes, always check your shoe boxes. I save these and I throw them in the boxes I have simply because it keeps the moisture away from the items, which helps preserve them. Every now and then I will swap out an old one for a new one, just to make sure that the desiccant is still working. This is some of the archival stuff for my daughter. On the left are some of the books we read as kids with her when she was a baby. These were her favorites, the one I had practically memorized. We read them so often. But as you'll see down at the bottom, I also have my brownie badge from when I was a Girl Scout and my very first public library card. My father saved that for me and brought it. On the top right, you'll see a box of precious items of my daughter's clothing we wanted to save, a rattle my uncle made her, my husband's music box from when he was a baby. And underneath that, you'll see part of the artwork we have saved from her over time. And then this is what my digital archive looks like right now. It is a deep work in progress. As you'll see, some things still say to sort, but it's just to give you an idea of how I am slowly working through naming conventions. I'm a professional librarian and even I'm still working on this. This is a massive work in progress. But on the right-hand side, you'll see a folder that's in better shape. As you'll see, Things that have specific dates, I've given it a full date and what was happening. So when we went skating at the wharf or when we went skating at Silver Spring. But then I also have a folder to save just all the daily photos. And another one, two birds, is all the photos that happened at my daughter's daycare. Some things you might want to consider saving that I saved. I did a lot of theater in high school. Instead of saving the physical posters, I decided to take photos of them and then get rid of the physical poster. In the middle, you'll see the scans of my bullet journal. I still have those physical bullet journals, but I have scanned them now. And actually, it's come in handy when I'm trying to figure out what's happened in the past. But I need to decide, am I keeping the physical items? Because these take up a lot of space, but at least I have the digital scans. And then on the right in my high school, they gave out these pins when you did things. And instead of saving the pins, I scanned them and I got rid of the items. So these are other things you might want to consider. I've had posters, flyers, and high school projects I digitized, pins and medals, a couple of trophies I photographed. Again, you want to save the memory, not necessarily the item. And then we've started to share our archive. First, we back up everything on Amazon. I also back up everything to a Google Cloud service. And I've created an album for the grandparents through Amazon has a photo sharing program. And so I've created an album and all of our family members have an Amazon Alexa that shows photos. And we've set it so that the photos rotate through. So I can change the photos here and it goes out to both sets of grandparents so they can see new things. And so that's what's happening here. And so what's left? Well, obviously we still have the monthly upkeep. I try to, scan and photograph everything once a month. I have an annual review that I do where I take everything out of the closet and then we go through it. And, this can take as long or as short as you need. Some days I fly through it all in an hour because I'm really just going through the physical items, deciding what to keep. And sometimes I sit there, I re-look at photos, I reread some of the journal entries. I also have a lot of file renaming to do. I also want to create a master index, by folder with file names where I'm going to write narratives, discuss people who are in photos or at events, and provide context. And again, that narrative documentation is important. So I'm going to take my time with it. Sometimes I just write up and add myself notes so I don't forget, but that's what I'm working on. Now, this webinar was designed for people in DC. I know some people in attendance today are not in DC, but some of these things are useful to you as well. Here in DC, if you need help with this, DC Public Library has what they call the Memory Lab, where they will help you convert old file formats to digital things. So those CD-ROMs I have, I can take them down to the DC Memory Lab and convert them from a CD-ROM to an online digitized thing I can actually access. The Library of Congress has a whole page on personal archiving. And all of these things that I'm mentioning, I will send to the follow-up email after this when I send out the link for the recording. Online, you can also find a dew point calculator, and that temperature and humidity monitor I was mentioning. The dew point calculator can help you know how close you might be to a mold outbreak. So that's why it's important. There are also several books you might want to consider reading. There's the Complete Guide to Personal Digital Archiving, Managing the Digital You, and Personal Archiving, Preserving Our Digital Heritage. These are three great ones to help you figure out how to manage and maintain and decide what to keep in your personal. And so I know we are nearing the end of today's session, but I wanted to leave time for questions and answers, both recorded and unrecorded. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. And again, this recording will go out to you later today. So again, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat, but thank you for coming. Yes. Someone commented, I really need this as my personal archiving is lagging behind my professional archiving. Thank you. Yeah, it's a work in progress. This is part of what I do professionally, but the digital side of things, it's unwieldy because I only just started focusing on this as something I maintain very recently. And so, you just chip away at it. And, you try to batch it up and chip away at it step by step. I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. So again, thank you for attending today.